Welcome to Murfreesboro Storytellers, our monthly series of events going on in Murfreesboro and Rutherford County. Today, we're particularly interested in talking about a program coming up, I guess, next year. And we originated this program with the help of Andrea Lowry and the Rutherford County Arts Alliance. So we have two ladies with us today who will be talking about the leading ladies of Rutherford history. That's Antoinette Vonzel, Assistant Director of the MTSU Center for Historic Preservation. Antoinette, welcome.
Thank you, John. I'm delighted to be here.
And Mary Donay Johnson is the other lady with us, author, actress, producer, involved in so many wonderful productions. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you, John.
Now, you live in Nashville, is that right?
I do.
How did you get involved in this project?
Well, I'm afraid I'm getting kind of a reputation for writing about people of history.
Okay.
I was on the Tennessee Arts Commission with Andrea Lowry, and she became aware of a project I had with Maryville College for their bicentennial. And I had discovered a woman who was very, very, very important when she was alive, but there was nothing in existence to tell us about her once she passed away. So I recreated her story, and we did it for the bicentennial as a special event. And it was a sellout crowd, and people were thrilled to learn about somebody who had had such an effect on the college, and they'd never heard her name.
Antoinette, tell me how the Rutherford Arts Alliance and you in particular got involved and had this idea for doing this production.
Well, John, like Mary, I was contacted by Andrea Lowry. Andrea realized that I had been the one who wrote a brochure for Rutherford County called In the Footsteps of Notable Women, which is a driving tour about historic sites in Murfreesboro, Smyrna, and Laverne, about women from the past. And I did that about 10 years ago, and I'm currently updating it. So we'll have a new and improved version out for this year, which is, of course, the centennial of women's suffrage. So it's the perfect year, 2020, to be talking about women's history.
The 100th anniversary, as a matter of fact, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
So I guess that got Andrea thinking. Antoinette, you did such a beautiful job on that brochure, and the whole concept of bringing women's stories from the past to light really got her imagination going. And she asked me if I would write a play about some of the notable women that you had in your brochure. And I said, you betcha, I'd love to. And so we started researching how many notable women there might be even beyond the brochure. And it started to be a huge number. And that's why we've created this whole year-long series of plays and podcasts. And MTSU students are doing some little 10-minute plays. And there's going to be site-specific plays that individual artists will bring to a gallery, for instance, or a restaurant or a cafe, to really highlight the many, many women in your history who made such contributions, and yet we don't know about them.
Mm-hmm. As I understand it, this originally was going to be presented in 2020, but due to the pandemic and everything else going on, it has been postponed for next year. Is that correct?
Right. It's called, the play that I'm writing is called The Party of 12, and it's about 12 notable women. And it was going to be the kickoff to the year-long of activities, and now it's going to be the culmination because we're hoping.
Where will it be presented?
Well, it should be at the Washington Theater in Patterson Park. And we hope, but we have to be safely able to gather by then. So if not there, we'll figure it out.
How did you come about with 12 out of the many women that have been such a large part of our history?
Well, I really like the number 12. I mean, even dozen, 12 disciples. Okay. 12 months of the year. It just felt like a good number. Now, I created a huge challenge because you can't really talk about 12 women in an hour and 15 minutes, which was the other thing that we wanted to accomplish, was to have a short play without an intermission. So I think I've done it, though, by having them all interact with each other and throw light upon each other and reveal the strengths that each one of them brought to their lives.
But how did you pick the 12 out of the many women that are in our history?
We voted.
Okay.
It's the year of the centennial of women's suffrage, so we voted.
Okay. All right. Right. Wonderful.
Well, Mary's so right that to try to talk about 12 was difficult enough, but she's done an amazing job. I mean, you will just be so thrilled with this play. It is so wonderful and very, very funny. And just the way she has the characters interact and play off each other, I was just so impressed, really. But what we first did, John, was to bring together just a few people here in Murfreesboro and kind of talk about a group of women that we could pull from. And then, as Mary said, she pulled 12 out. So we came up with about 24, and it was Sarah Kelis from the Albert Gore Research Center at MTSU, Mary Watkins from the African American Heritage Society of Rutherford County, and Katie Wilson from the Bradley Academy Museum and Cultural Center. So the four of us sat down and we looked at the brochure that I had done, and then we also looked at some of the women featured at the Gore Center, which has an amazing collection of women's history resources at the Gore Center. And then also some individuals who Katie and Mary suggested. So we just kind of came up with this overall list. And then our group, Leading Ladies sort of founding committee, all met, and Patience Long, the director of the Center for the Arts, she set up a voting mechanism for us. So it was online. We did online voting. And so that's one of the ways that we were able to pick the 12 women to be featured in the play. And then I think Mary made a few adjustments along the way, as is always the case. But we definitely are not at all trying to say that either 12 or 24 women are the only important women in Rutherford County at all. And I should say, too, that, of course, we only were dealing with women who are no longer with us. So we did not want to picking and could be difficult and could cause some hurt feelings. So all of the women that we talk about are women from our past who are no longer living. And so that was one of our rules that we decided on early on. So anyway, we also, because we've had to go remotely, as everybody has during this pandemic, with our website, we weren't really going to have much of a website per se, but we decided to make it a little bit more full and intricate because of the pandemic. And so we created a page called Share Your Story. So on the Leading Ladies website, there is a form that you can fill out, and you can share the story of your ancestor whom you believe to be a leading lady. And we're going to have a separate section of the website where we will feature those submissions where we can sort of crowdsource and use family history to talk about some of the other wonderful, accomplished women in our history.
Have you decided on a cast for the presentation?
Oh, we have a director, and we have just recently brought her on board. She's from Murfreesboro, and her name is Carrie Bowe, and she's an incredible, wonderful artist with so many skills. Very excited about her. She will be in charge, really. She'll have the first opportunity to try to assemble a cast, and then we're hoping to have, just for my benefit, a reading over Zoom where I can hear the words out loud, and then I can make adjustments to really polish the play after hearing actors work with it.
Sure.
But one thing I wanted to jump on, Antoinette, you're so right. I mean, the wealth of women in the past is incredible. But I have to tell you that sitting at that table with the committee of women that has been assembled for the Leading Ladies Project is an incredible privilege. And the beauty is many of these women didn't know each other before this. before this project. We're bringing in people from all aspects of the community. And that's the whole point. We want to reflect back. This party of 12 needs to reflect back exactly all the segments that Murfreesboro can be proud of. And Rutherford County, of course.
Well, looking at the
website,
looking at the names on the website of ladies in the past, I've known many of them, but your 12 will be those of the past, right?
Yes, definitely. And that's the fun of it. I mean, you can imagine taking someone's life and reading about it is one thing. And the things that you read might be things that they wanted you to know.
Sure.
The things that you read might be things that other people found out that necessarily, they might not necessarily have wanted you to know. Some of it you have to make up. And I love the idea of bringing people back from whatever the other side looks like, bring them back and create a character of who they would be now, today, interacting with our world and our issues and our concerns. And boy, we've got a bunch of them right now.
I'm sure of that, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a date yet, or just an approximate date of next year when it'll be presented?
Well, what I've heard is March, April, May.
Okay, sometime in the spring then.
Yeah.
The spring of next year.
Yeah.
Antoinette, how much has the Center for Historic Preservation been involved in this, other than you personally?
Well, mainly it's been me personally in my role at the Center for Historic Preservation as assistant director. And one of the topics that I've been particularly working on over the last couple of years has been getting ready for this 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. And our director, Dr. Carol Van West, and one of my colleagues, Kira Duke, the three of us have served on a committee working towards statewide events related to women's suffrage. And we started working on that 2 or 3 years ago. So to try to make sure that there was a complete and exciting coverage of the centennial of women's suffrage. The state has a commission on the women's suffrage anniversary, and they're planning a lot of activities, and some of them have gone remote, but they're planning, I believe, still some activities for this August, which is the actual anniversary, August 26th.
Good. I was going to ask you that. What was the actual anniversary? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and just the history of the suffrage movement in Tennessee is so incredibly fascinating. You couldn't make it up. I mean, it's so wonderful. And Tennessee became the perfect 36. As you know, I'm sure the suffrage movement, women's suffrage movement in the United States began all the way back in 1848 with the women's meeting in upstate New York, Seneca Falls Convention for women's suffrage. But anyway, over time, it eventually, the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, which became the 19th Amendment, that amendment was proposed in Congress every year from 1878 until 1919, when it was finally passed. And then, of course, the states had to ratify the amendment. And at that time, there were 48 states in the Union, and 36 were needed to ratify. And by March, I believe, of 1920, 35 states had ratified, and the two that were left that were seen as possibilities were Delaware and Tennessee, because Tennessee had actually given women the vote in presidential and municipal elections in 1919. So anyway, Delaware in June rejected the 19th Amendment, and so it came down to Tennessee, and everybody converged on Nashville in August of 1920. And it just was really, really fascinating. there was a special session of the General Assembly that was called, and the Senate overwhelmingly passed the amendment, but the House was deadlocked, and it was looking like it wasn't going to happen. It really was. And then Harry Byrne from Nyota in McMinn County, he had voted with the anti-suffragists to table the amendment. And then when it came to a vote on the actual amendment, he voted with the suffragists, and he voted in favor of the 19th Amendment. And of course, that became a very famous story because his mother had written him a letter the day before to encourage him to vote for suffrage. And he took that advice, but he also said that he believed it to be a right for women to have full suffrage. He believed it was morally and legally right to do. And he wanted to help women escape from political slavery, as he called it. And he also wanted to bring attention to his political party and be the ones that had gotten it through. So he just did a fascinating thing, and he's well known to this day. Nationally, Tennessee is well known as being the perfect 36, and so it's just extremely exciting.
Wonderful. Were there any ladies in the legislature at that time? I presume there were not.
In the Tennessee state legislature?
Yes,
No, there weren't.
I did not think. Well, that's a wonderful story. Fascinating, as a matter of fact.
And I've had the privilege.
Yes, please.
I've had the privilege of listening to wonderful stories like that now for a year about Rutherford County.
Okay.
So you can see why it's been such a joy to bring Party of 12 to light.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and when Andrea talked to me about this project, and we realized, hey, this is a great way to celebrate women's suffrage, I realized, John, that I didn't know anything about the suffrage movement in Murfreesboro. I knew about the statewide suffrage movement, but I didn't know about our Murfreesboro background to it, or Rutherford County. And so I did some research. Oh, okay. I will. I discovered a couple of fascinating women locally who were involved in the suffrage movement, and there's still a lot more research that needs to be done on some of these women. But it's fascinating because the two main ones who made it onto our list of leading ladies, one of them worked with the traditional suffrage organization, the National American Women's Suffrage Association, and her name was Sarah Spence DeBow, and she wrote a fascinating pamphlet about how she worked to influence State Senator Andrew Todd from Murfreesboro to support women's suffrage because he was so powerful in the state Senate. And her record of that is available on the Tennessee Virtual Archive through the Tennessee State Library and Archives. And it's called The History of the Case. And I encourage everyone to Google it and read it because it is fascinating. She was hysterical. It's really, really funny. And she talks about how she had to keep visiting Senator Todd to keep him on with supporting ratification. And she mentions that she was called to Nashville to meet Carrie Chapman Catt, the person who was in charge of the entire national suffrage movement, in order to meet with her and tell her how she had been able to get Senator Todd to support it. And then on the other side, there was a woman named Annie Brawley Jackson, who lived in Murfreesboro and actually worked on the railroad. She was a freight clerk, and her husband was a freight agent. And she was a great supporter of suffrage, and she was a member of the National Women's Party, which was the more what would you say, more recently formed organization, a little bit more radical. You know how when you want some social change, you usually have the standard bearers, and then you've got the radical group, kind of younger group pushing things along. Well, she was in that group, and she worked in Nashville with Shelton White from Jackson, Tennessee, famous Tennessean who was a lawyer and who was basically representing the National Women's Party in Nashville to try to get this amendment ratified. So it's really cool that we had women who were involved in both organizations that were working so hard for women's suffrage.
Wonderful, great story. Well, you mentioned Senator Todd, that the Todd family, as I know you know, has been such an instrumental part of the history of Murfreesboro all over, as a matter of fact. So it's interesting that he was involved in this happening in the legislature. You have any other local names that you know of?
Oh, yes, in 1914 was kind of a pivotal year because that National American Women's Suffrage Association that I mentioned, they held their national convention in Nashville. So that was really significant that they were holding it in the South. And also it got people in Tennessee very excited about women's suffrage. And so in 1914, we in the Daily News Journal, they published the Equal Suffrage Association of Murfreesboro, and they published the names of the officers. Mm-hmm. And our Annie Brawley Jackson was on there as the secretary. Hattie Wendell was the president. We found out that she was very involved with the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. She was a home extension agent. She worked in the home economics area in Smith County and Williamson mm-hmm. County as well. And then Hattie Cannon was the first vice president. Lib Murphy was the second vice president. I mentioned Annie Jackson, and then Essie Hancock was the treasurer. So some of those ladies we still need to do some more research on and find out more about them. And then John, another local woman whom I'm sure you're familiar with, who's very important in thinking about suffrage, is Mary Ellen Vaughn.
Oh yes,
and Mary Ellen Vaughn. Yes. She's an African American, well-educated woman who had a newspaper here in Murfreesboro beginning in 1920, and then she opened up a training school in her home. And she one of her goals with that school was to help African Americans to pass some of the literacy tests and other tests that were put up during this time of Jim Crow and segregation as impediments for voting for African Americans. And so she was very important, in that sense, for what she was doing here locally. And Mary Watkins has told me that there's going to be a state historic marker erected there on Vaughn Street, where Mary Ellen Vaughn's home used to be, in order to commemorate what she did for the community and for the city in general. So I believe that that's going to be sometime this summer. Again, it's one of those things that got postponed a little bit because of the pandemic.
But she's well deserving of the recognition. I remember Mary Ellen for sure. Mary, tell us more about your background in getting into this and what you did for Maryville College.
Well, I would love to talk about that for sure, but I also want to I very much want to talk about the community involvement part of this whole project, that the Leading Ladies is very much wanting to pull in all of the arts. So the play that I wrote, Party of 12, for this does pull in at least 12 artists as well, visual artists, because there's a component of the play where a piece of art is created on stage using 12 components. And so we're very excited about putting out a call for people to send us sketches, and maybe they'll be selected to do the actual artwork, which will then have a life beyond this. Maybe it'll be note cards, or maybe it'll be an installation somewhere. But I really wanted to emphasize that the beauty of and I don't mean to exclude you, John. I absolutely love men. Men have their place. Men are great.
Nope.
But the
No
beauty of working with a committee of nothing but women is that we are collaborative. This particular group is really collaborative and very, very excited about releasing the potential in each of us. I mean, that's the message of this whole year is let's talk about the people from our past, shine a light on them, and be emboldened to make our own contribution. So I want to make sure we got that point in. And I also have to really say that it's touchy. There's a whole lot of history that we're confronting right now in this minute that's very uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Yes.
And I like to think that this committee of women is very respectfully and responsibly and fairly bringing our history to light in a way that acknowledges the truth of it, but also acknowledges the bravery and the courage of people who brought us to this day and who can take us beyond this day.
Wonderful, wonderful.
You know what I'm saying, Antoinette? Have I said that?
I think I understand. Yes.
Yeah.
Very important.
It's so important. I think we have to be our better selves and looking to the past and understanding the struggles that people had. There's a whole section of the play that talks about the first schools that were built for African-American people who were newly freed and how really rudimentary they were, but how much joy there was to finally embrace the freedom to learn.
Well, and I think just to add to what Mary was saying, we wanted to be sure that in the play, we did acknowledge, for example, segregation and slavery. We wanted to acknowledge that, we end up with the 12 women. Some of them would not have sat together in a room when they would actually have been alive. Sarah Childress Polk is one of our 12. She's one of the leading ladies of Rutherford County as a very key, influential first lady for future first ladies, and was incredibly influential. And we're thrilled to have her in our group of women. But she was also a slaveholder, and we wanted to be sure that did come through as being something that was acknowledged at that time. And then also just to kind of get across that, not all of the women had the same opportunities in the past. And so we hope that we've been able to do that. I think that Mary has been able to do that. And then, just getting back to education, John, and I know that you support this, of course, but just when you look at our leading ladies and just when you look at their educational achievements, it's so incredibly impressive. When you look at Mary Scales and you look at Myrtle Lord and Mary Ellen Vaughn and some of the others that we've Sarah Childress Polk, one very well educated, even for her time when it was very difficult for women to get
and well decorated. Nanny Rucker.
Yes. And
all those ladies you're mentioning, I've known and worked with and been involved with in the community.
Oh, that's so cool. I might have to interview you before this is all over.
I'm not sure about that. We have about 1 minute left, ladies. This is a wonderful project. Looking forward to the leading ladies of Rutherford County. What was the title you gave it now, Mary?
Well, the play is Party of 12.
Party of 12. And that'll be in 2021, sometime, maybe the spring of next year.
In the spring.
Ladies, thank you so much. Antoinette Vonzel, Assistant Director, MTSU Center for Historic Preservation, and Mary Danae Johnson, the playwright. Ladies, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That's fun.